Venus and star blessings, everybody. Let's talk about the full moon in Gemini coming up in just a couple of days' time. Okay, so the first thing is to always remember to look at where this cycle began, right? So where did it begin? It began in Scorpio, new moon in Scorpio, which was conjunct Mars and Ceres in Scorpio, which happened very close to the occultation of Mars. That is a Sun-Mars conjunction in Scorpio, whilst Mars was invisible and still is invisible. I have shared some thoughts around just the sense of relief of the Sun moving out of Scorpio into Sagittarius just in the last couple of days. And I asked people if they felt that shift, and everyone is basically saying yes, and it's a refreshing change, which it is. I think this Scorpio season has been the most intense season, as I've said already a couple of times, for all of us, really, and certainly for that part of the world that's in a severe crisis still. So, you know, look, the Sun in Sagittarius it's a wonderful energy, because despite of the nature of reality and everything that's going on, it can bring forth a greater sense of feeling more optimistic and more uplifted, more enthusiastic and more confident, and just a little bit more excited about stepping out into things and perhaps enjoying life a little bit more. Because in Scorpio, it's literally like the Sun takes us into the underworld, into a cave. And whatever is floating around under there, meaning in our unconscious, it's, it all sort of circulates around. The muddy waters have this motion, and things sort of just come up, right, within us. And, you know, a lot of the things that come up are not, they're not easy, they're not pleasant, they're not very comfortable, but thus is the nature of Scorpio. It takes us into the domain of the soul, and it takes us into the domain of the unconscious, and it takes us into the domain of our personal limitations and fears, and challenges and difficulties, in order to try to resolve some of them, or confront some of them, or transform some of those aspects of ourself or our life, and so forth. So it's always quite an intense passage when the Sun is in Scorpio anyway, but because of everything around it, such as, you know, the new moon in Scorpio, Mars being there in Scorpio, Ceres being there in Scorpio, it's been a very intense passage, to say the least. So moving forward, we are into the Sagittarius component of the wheel. But this new moon is, it's so interesting to me. I might actually just share the screen so that we can look at some visuals. So November the 27th for Southern Hemisphere, Melbourne, Australia, which is where I am. There's the Sun, there's the moon opposite each other. So first of all, where did this cycle begin in your own chart, for instance, which was in Scorpio? And now you'll be looking at the Gemini and Sagittarius parts of your chart. So perhaps things that began at that point now have an opportunity to be seen more clearly, right? Because the full moon is always an illumination process. Now, illumination is such a wonderful word, right? And when we are illuminated with something, you know, it could be, the word illumination in and of itself doesn't feel like it inherently has anything difficult attached to it, but it depends on who we are, on our life story, where we're at, what we're doing, what we're not doing, in terms of what's going to be illuminated. So anything can be illuminated. Anything, just to use simple language, anything that is really great or anything that is not so great, you know. So the illumination just simply is pointing to things being seen that at the beginning of the cycle could not be seen, right? I think the most interesting thing that I actually see here is the Sun, Mars, and Ceres all lining up in Sagittarius, which was exactly the same as where this cycle began, except that they were all in Scorpio. Now, Ceres has been trailing Mars and the Sun throughout Scorpio season and is doing it throughout Sagittarius season as well. That is not a typical thing. Like I've said in a couple of videos recently, the last time Ceres was in Sagittarius was in 1991. So that's not coincidental. Now, the themes that we are really looking at here is, just to keep it very, very simple, and I will obviously speak to collective narratives and also, you know, some ideas for each of us individually in our path. So there's the Sun-Moon opposition. So the Moon is obviously then opposite Mars and opposite Ceres as well. And one of the biggest features, of course, is that this full moon is squaring Saturn, right, in Pisces. I'll get to that in a minute, but just a couple of other things that I want to emphasize here. Ceres is the Roman name for the goddess Ceres. This is an asteroid. There is also an asteroid called Demeter, which is the same goddess, except it's the Greek name. Now, Demeter also happens to be, coincidentally, which nothing is coincidence, she happens to be in Sagittarius as well, just sitting right over here next to the Sun, actually. She's at about 6 degrees of Sagittarius. So we have Demeter, who is also Ceres. It's the same goddess, but it's two astronomical bodies in the sky that happen to both be in Sagittarius, lining up with the full moon. We also have the goddess Cassandra, who is the goddess of prophecy in Sagittarius as well. So there's 1, 2, 3 feminine deities all lining up with the Sun and Mars and opposing the full moon and squaring Saturn. The archetypes emphasized here are clearly Sagittarius and Gemini, and this is really going to highlight people's opinions versus people's beliefs. And because Saturn is squaring the full moon, there is an implication that there is going to be tension and difficulty around the matters of people's opinions and what one believes. Saturn is really in a square aspect. As I've said, I said this yesterday in another recording that I did where I spoke about actually just the Sun being square Saturn. So have a listen to that. It's worthy of a listen, just from the point of view of understanding the square aspect. It's a last quarter square, so on and so forth. Take a listen to that if you want to hear that level more in depth. But the essential thing that I was pointing out was that the nature of the square aspect is the same nature of Saturn. So it's a double signature of a square energy here in this full moon. So Saturn is the lord of time, the lord of restrictions, the lord of responsibilities, the lord of limitations, the lord of reality, right? This consensus reality. So the beginnings of this cycle in Scorpio, which were beyond intense, with people's passion around, well, around matters in your own life, and certainly around the matters that are going on in the Middle East. There was just such a intensified energy in the ether about the force of things that were going on all around, not just in one particular way, but all around. And so when we get to the full moon, there's this sense of there is a conflict here because of Saturn being wedged in the middle of the two. It's a T-square, basically, right, with the full moon. So I think perhaps the likely sense of this energy will be difficulty in people wanting to communicate their perspective and their point of view onto what another person believes or what another person thinks is true. And in the ultimate sense of truth comes from within, and it also corresponds to nature and ultimately corresponds to the source creation of all things. That level of truth is pure. However, that level of purity is largely infected, if you like, by this narrative of reality that all of the human collective has constructed in one way or another. So on the surface level, the archetype of Gemini, just remember, the archetype of Gemini is the archetype in the entire wheel of the zodiac that has to put across its personal opinion. Whether it's truth or not doesn't really matter. It's just my opinion. Truth actually ultimately comes from Sagittarius, not Gemini. I heard someone recently say the full moon is going to indicate you speaking your truth. I'm not sure that statement is really accurate. Gemini doesn't correspond to truth. It corresponds to your mental perceptions on information and data that you are collecting. It certainly does point to connecting the dots from information you are gathering, but information that you gather doesn't necessarily mean it's true. It just means that you are gathering information and you are expressing your point of view and your opinion on ABC. Doesn't mean it's the truth. So Saturn is going to be a very real reminder here to everyone, really, from the stance of our personal opinions and our sense of truth of what is actually going on. And Saturn is asking us to really consider what we are actually communicating, Gemini, and also be very real with what the truth actually is. And it's fundamentally, it's a conflict because, as I've said previously, a square aspect is essentially coloring a space where energies that have a different position, in this case there's an opposing position, and there's also a different position because of the square. Oppositions mean opposing positions and squares mean different positions. So we have both those layers in here. So the dilemma is being responsible with our language and our opinions and our words and our thoughts, and being very responsible with the position we take with maybe a self-righteous attitude, because while Sagittarius at the ultimate highest level can speak to truth, the ultimate truth, as I said, in the consensus reality state, truth has been distorted and projected in people's personal take on what is truth or what isn't. And Saturn here really just asks everybody to stand back and take some ownership and some responsibility of what's been distributed from our personal point of view and from our beliefs as well. You know, Sagittarius at a personality unconscious level can be very arrogant and very self-righteous. My truth is the only truth and this truth is the only way. That's the downside to Sag. The upside to Sag, of course, is that you embark on a journey of truth for yourself from your own internal connection to your soul and connection to source. And that's your personal journey and personal prerogative, and you have every right to do that. But to impose that on everybody else is exactly that. It's an imposition. And whilst Venus is in Libra, which I spoke about this yesterday, Venus in Libra really teaches us to be more accepting of the diversity that exists on this earth plane. Holding a particular position or point of view or belief is everyone's prerogative, but to force that onto others and to say that others are wrong because they don't believe or they don't side with what you're saying is a very unconscious position. It just comes back to that same point of, in order for me to feel secure and to feel right in my opinion and my beliefs, I've got to make this group over here wrong. And that's not the highest level of truth at all. That's just the game of the ego, because the ego always needs to feel superior and it needs to feel like it's winning. It never wants to lose. So the inherent issues that are going to be really highlighted during this full moon period are all the multiple range of opinions on what is going on with the Sagittarius components of, you know, the Middle East, which is the position that people hold about who is God, what is God, and which is the right way, kind of thing. And of course, like I said, Gemini is always the archetype that holds a position where everything is black and white, right or wrong, good or bad. So at a more simplified level, without considering what's happening in the world out there for a moment, this Gemini full moon in your birth chart really just could highlight, depending on where it is in your birth chart, of course. Let's just say it was in the 5th house for you, for example. It would be running across 5 and 11, right? Because you've got Gemini in the 5th house and Sagittarius in the 11th house, just as a way of example. Then the Gemini full moon in the 5th house, in a positive sense, could be a passage for you where you really find your voice, right, in being able to express your personal opinion on certain things, right? But if you can do that in a healthy way, and you understand that others have a different point of view, then it doesn't produce conflict. It's when we try to impose our own opinion and belief on somebody else, suggesting that their perspective and their belief is wrong. That's the only way I can feel secure within my belief and my perception. That's the personality level of the archetypes manifesting. So Saturn is going to be a very real reminder there for all of us to be careful about what we are speaking. Everything is energy, right? Including our tone of voice, the language that we use, the words that come out of our mouth. That is all energy, which creates waves of things that we experience, right? And Saturn is really a very difficult energy, but it is also one of the greatest teachers for us as well. We have to learn things in the material world. We have to learn how to work with this material world, which requires responsibility in the actions and choices and words that we speak. It doesn't mean that we cannot have our own personal perspective or our own belief system. That's fine. Everyone does have that, but it's the awareness here. And remember, full moons make us aware. That's what an opposition ultimately achieves at the highest level. It starts off as a polarized force, which can produce conflict because it's me versus him or me versus them. That's the initial sense of the energy of an opposition. But the promise of an opposition is the awareness that can come out of it. The awareness comes because things are illuminated. When things are illuminated, you have clearer seeing on a bigger spectrum. When you can see things in a bigger picture way, and bigger picture being the operative word here with the sun in Sagittarius, then you are better informed and you have a greater sense of awareness of things that are going on, right? So Saturn is just going to be a very real and clear reminder for us about all these Gemini, Sagittarius factors in our life, our personal opinion and what we believe, and how we are expressing that, how we are handling that in our own life and in relation to our relationship with life and the world and others. And once again, because Venus is in Libra, she's really asking us to be more accepting of the diversity. And, you know, one of the biggest problems, there's so many, but one of the biggest problems is that people struggle to accept the differences that exist, right, on this planet. And the other factor connected to that as well is our heavy sense of conditioning as well. And Saturn is the planet of conditioning. But let's remember that Saturn is in Pisces, so it's completing a very important passage. It's right at the end of the wheel. So it is restructuring our whole level of what we thought this reality was. It's deconstructing and restructuring literally the whole reality that we thought was actually. So it is a very tricky combination here. These three are all mutable signs. One of the greatest things about mutable signs is the desire and ability to learn something new. That's what mutable signs actually really reflect and speak to. So there is a learning potential here for all of us with what we are coming to understand in our own mind, with the moon being in Gemini, and our own beliefs, and perhaps what we believed previously may not be what we believe anymore. So Saturn is reminding us of those components of our position at this point in time. Ceres and Demeter, which is the same goddess, both happening to be in Sagittarius, I think will highlight the matters around the conditioned belief systems that people hold, and perhaps a sense of loss around that in some kind of way, a sense of grief around that in some kind of way, because there is a very powerful emergence of energy trying to transition the entire earth plane, and this has been going on for quite some time. And these smaller passages of new moons, full moons, and so forth are just an aspect of this grand scale of transition that's going on. And as human beings, you know, the most natural thing for us to do is to hold on to our old values, beliefs, morals, perceptions, and ideas, in thinking that what we learned is that's what describes life. That's what describes what life means. But that's not true at all. Life is always changing, because life is energy, it's movement. Nothing remains the same. So our beliefs and our understanding, our cosmological orientation, which is all Sagittarius, that too changes over time, provided we can keep ourselves open enough to go with that change. And mutable signs, as I said, are very powerful at helping us integrate the changes that are actually coming through or trying to come through. And Ceres and Demeter really are speaking to, because Sagittarius is the archetype, Sagittarius, 9th house, Jupiter, are the archetypes that really speak to, how do I find meaning in my life? What actually gives meaning to my life? Is it this? Is it that? Is it believing this? Is it studying that? Is it believing one God? Is it believing this goddess? Is it, what is it that actually gives you meaning? So it's the journey and the initiation into finding true meaning to your life. So every time we have Sagittarius planets, you know, moving through the zodiac, we feel a greater sense of connection or desire to want to explore and find more meaning into our life. The Ceres Demeter factor of 2 asteroids being in Sagittarius could highlight to us that what I thought brought meaning to my life in this particular way actually doesn't do that for me anymore. So now I'm trying to find a new sense of meaning. I'm trying to discover something new in myself and in life and in the world and in God. That will be part of the Ceres Demeter component in this full moon. It's the illumination, awareness, full moon, that what I used to believe about this or about that, which provided some sense of meaning for me, I don't feel that anymore. I don't believe that anymore. So I now need to find something new. The Ceres in Sagittarius can also be, because Ceres is, yes, she is about loss and grief, mourning. She's the mother of Persephone, whose daughter was abducted by Pluto. So in Sagittarius, it's the search for meaning, and that search for meaning actually provides a sense of feeling sustained and nurtured. Ceres is the earth mother, literally the earth mother, who provides the sustenance that nourishes our body. That's why we have the seasons: summer, spring, winter, autumn, right? So apart from the difficult side of Ceres, which is the grief component, which is loss and death and rebirth, it's also the asteroid that corresponds to trying to find something that's going to sustain us. And she sustains us through the archetype that she's moving through. So what is the archetype? It's Sagittarius. What does Sagittarius help us integrate? Meaning. What's the meaning to my life, to everything that's going on? So it could be a time of, you know, connecting with a teacher, for instance. Sagittarius corresponds to teachers. I'm not talking about school teachers as in primary school, that would be here in the 3rd house, but a teacher who is somebody that inspires you, that could act like a mentor. So it could be a time of seeking out somebody who you can learn from. That could be finding an astrology teacher, any kind of mentor that inspires you in your journey, for instance, right? So those are some of the themes that come up as well. So let me just see. Okay. Mars is still invisible. So the Sun Mars in Sagittarius is a very powerful, energizing energy. Mars, of course, is aggression, assertion, passion, desires. It can also serve as a way of encouraging us and inspiring us to act on things that actually do bring more meaning to our life. Mars is the fuel in the tank. It gives us the energy, the drive, the willpower. Mars literally rules iron in the body. And I say that because I've had iron issues for most of my life, really, because I don't eat any meat, right? So Mars gets kind of empty in the tank for me, and I have to keep topping it up with iron infusions or iron supplements and things like that. So whilst Mars literally speaks to corresponding to the iron in your body, which is energy, in the same way it corresponds on that psychological level, the energy and drive that we feel we either have or don't have. In what I'm saying is, in Sagittarius, there would be a greater sense of inspirational energy and drive and willpower to action the goals around creating more meaning in your life, right? To feel a greater sense of inspiration. You know, we've come out of Scorpio, dark cave underworld, and we've now come up into Sag. Sag is the archer, right? It's that arrow shooting up in the sky. Scorpio took us down into the underworld. So they are literally the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So Sagittarius can create that sense of inspired vision and inspired energy with Mars in Sag. That's at a really positive level. But in the matters of the Middle East, this will be, no doubt, people fighting for their beliefs. I'm fighting because I believe this God, and I'm fighting because I believe in this God. Your God is wrong. It says so here in the Bible or in the Torah or in the Quran or wherever. The Torah, the Quran, the Bible, all have different levels of truth. Is one more prominent than the other? Is one more right than the other? In the ultimate level of truth, no, absolutely not. Can you imagine a God that, if you understand that the source creation to all things, God, Goddess, is all loving, all inclusive, all compassionate, all giving, unconditional love. If that's the kind of source that is the ultimate, which I believe it is, can you imagine that God coming down to earth and siding with one particular group and condemning the others? Because that's what human beings are doing through a book and scriptures and writing and beliefs and perspectives. That's what human beings are doing. They are taking some level of truth and distorting it in order to create a favorable position for what they believe. One other thing, Gemini, of course, in esoteric astrology is ruled by Venus. Esoteric astrology in some rulerships has very different rulerships happening. And for Gemini, it happens to be Venus. And what that says in a nutshell, because it's quite complex, but what it says in a nutshell is that Venus ruling Gemini on an esoteric level is the voice in the sphere of the esoteric rays, because there are 7 rays, and the planets and the archetypes speak through those 7 rays. Venus speaking through being the ruler of Gemini when she comes through that particular archetype from an esoteric level is a reminder that we are all brothers and sisters. Gemini, the twins, Castor and Pollux, brothers. Gemini corresponds to brothers and sisters. So Venus being the goddess of love, ultimately the goddess of love, from an esoteric perspective, she's shining the light on this full moon saying, hey, we are all brothers and sisters, and we all come from the one same source, love, and we all return to the same source, love. And there is no difference between you and me. You might hear that and understand it intellectually, but how many people live by that? Live by that truth? Not many. The majority don't. The majority live in the consensus state, which is overseen by Saturn. And Saturn at the unconscious level is heavy, heavy, heavy conditioning. So there's a lot of interesting factors in play here. The other thing that we need to consider is that what is the ruler of Gemini? It's Mercury. Where is Mercury? In Sagittarius. Now, the most interesting factor of this full moon, not the most interesting, well, it is the most interesting in one way, but I mean, there are a lot of themes that are very interesting. Interesting, of course, being a Gemini word. So here's what I want to point to. Mercury is exactly square Neptune during this full moon, exactly square Neptune. And it is the ruler to the full moon. So Mercury-Neptune aspects, as I've often demonstrated, pointed to through chart examples, many videos and so forth, at that very unconscious level is pure deception. Pure deception. Just about every politician has a Mercury-Neptune aspect. I've proven that because I've shown many charts over and over again. Benjamin Netanyahu happens to have a Mercury-Neptune aspect as well. Just saying. So I think that's a very important factor to consider here, because that's running in the backdrop of the full moon. The moon's energy in Gemini is ruled by Mercury, because Mercury rules Gemini. Mercury is squaring Neptune. Mercury is in its detriment in Sagittarius as well. So the ruler to the moon is in detriment and forming a square to Neptune, an exact square. So collectively, with the issues going on in that part of the world, I know there are other parts of the world. I don't want to make it seem that I'm not aware of other matters on the earth plane. I am, to a certain extent. I don't know everything that's going on. I can't. I'm just one person with one brain, right? I can't spend my whole day researching every single state, every single city, every single country. I just don't have the time. But I am aware of other matters, crises and problems going on in other parts of the world as well. And it's not to not give any importance to those. But at the moment, I am very aware and traumatized by the events in the Middle East, frankly speaking. Hence why there's been a lot of mention of what's going on there in my last, I think, 4 or 5 videos. So from that perspective, this full moon I think is going to be very, 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 very tricky with information that comes out that I think is going to be information that totally misinforms people. Totally misinforms. And this is, why we have to use our own critical mind, critical reasoning skills, and take some responsibility, Saturn, for what we are spitting out of our mouth, Gemini, about what we believe, Sagittarius. That's basically what's going on here, because the energy underneath the full moon is this Mercury square Neptune, which will be distorted perceptions on belief and on what is true. Sagittarius being the archetype corresponding to truth. Squaring Neptune, which corresponds to disillusionment. Neptune corresponds to disillusionment on this physical earth plane, because it is, honestly, Neptune is actually probably the most difficult energy out of all the planets. It can be so subtle, and people might think, no, Pluto is much worse, Uranus is much worse, Saturn is much worse. And yes, I agree that transits by those planets can feel very heavy and very intense and unbearable, actually, sometimes, without question. But the reason Neptune is so difficult is because you don't know what is actually going on. You literally don't know what is going on. And then eventually, the truth of the matter comes into full view, if you like, and you are left feeling like, the rug's just been pulled out under your feet, because you had a particular perspective on a person or a situation. You thought what you were seeing and hearing was absolutely right and correct and truthful. And then Neptune shows you the real thing of what is actually there. And what follows that? Massive disappointment. Massive disappointment. That's the most difficult thing about Neptune transits. It's being disillusioned by the events and things that are going on, later realizing that's not at all who that person was or what that situation was about. And because of how closely you had aligned yourself with it, remember, Neptune corresponds to our ideals. What's the ideal is something that we attach ourselves to, that we want to believe is real, is true, that is beautiful. And then when we find out it's not, our heart feels broken. We feel immense disappointment. So just be aware that this full moon, because it is ruled by Mercury, which is in its detriment, and it is squared, forming a square to Neptune, there is likely to be a lot of distortion of facts, information, and conflict between information and what people think is the truth and believe is the truth. And then ultimately feeling perhaps disappointed, disillusioned, and really upset because you had put so much energy and respect and time into this or that or the other, and then you find out that in fact wasn't true. What that person said, what their motivations were, so on and so forth. Remember, people's motivations and agendas are very, very hidden still, because Mars is still invisible. It will not become visible until January 2024. So the bigger agendas taking place have ulterior motives for the dressing that they are presenting on the external level. And frankly, it's so obvious, but some people, not some, actually many people, cannot see it, because the majority are ruled by Saturn, which means they are conditioned. to believe this, to believe that, to trust the government. So yeah, you just have to, you have to be able to discern through the BS, basically. Okay, so what else have we got here? Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, that's right. I knew there was one more thing. There is one more thing. With Venus passing over the South Node, which I spoke about this yesterday, I just want to add one extra thing, which I think is really important that I forgot to mention. Venus in Libra is it's a few things. First of all, she's in her domicile position, so she's very dignified, very powerful. Venus is a benefic planet. Venus in Libra will pass over the Venus Libran star point that was born on the wheel October 2022. So from October 2022 to now, this is the first time that Libra has come, that Venus has come back into Libra, right? The Venus star point was a Sun-Venus conjunction in Libra. An evening star was born on the wheel after over 100 years of having been in Scorpio. So this is the first time that the goddess comes back to the sign that she formed the conjunction to the sun with and was born as the Libran evening star. I think that that's actually very crucial because it is the first time since that Libran Venus star point was born, and because she's in a dignified position, and because she's going to pass the South Node, and she is the morning star goddess still at the moment. The morning star corresponds to the warrior goddess fighting for justice. And there is a big fight for justice in a lot of different ways. But if I want to point to the Middle East, then there's a huge matter of injustice. Okay? So bottom line, I think when Venus passes over the South Node and then gets to the end of Libra, 29 degrees, which is where the Venus star point was born, at 29 degrees of Libra, there will be a seed planted at that time, which I think will be helpful for the near future, specifically related to matters of peace on Earth. So a seed will be planted at that time, and I think that's not to be underestimated. On a personal level, Venus transiting over the Venus star point, the Libran Venus star point, that Libran Venus star point is your Scorpio star point when you were born. Okay, everyone has a Scorpio Venus star point on the wheel unless they're over 100 years old. So your Scorpio Venus star point, from the time you were born until now, has happened to move from Scorpio into Libra. So 29 degrees of Libra, where that Libran star point took place in your birth chart, wherever that was, it might have connected to an angle in your chart if you've got the right time of birth, which most people don't. It could be connecting to your sun, your Mercury, your Venus, your moon. Any of the personal planets are much easier to read. When the star points hit the outer planets, it becomes more complex. It could be that you have planets in Aries, later Aries, and the Libran Venus star point opposed your Aries planets. So wherever the Libran Venus star point activated things in your chart, in October of 2022, Venus's passage now, since this is her first time of revisiting that sign that she gave a birth to a star point, something can be seen, seeded, and revealed at this time, and it should be something delightful, something beneficial, something that that brings happiness to you as well in some kind of way. Venus rules happiness. Venus rules delightful things. And Venus is extremely dignified in the sign of Libra. So that's just another layer of this transit of Venus in Libra, right? But from that cataclysmic crisis point in the Middle East, I think the Venus passing over the star point in the South Node will plant a particular seed that will very much have to do with peace and harmony and justice. So we'll see. Let's see if there's any truth in that. Obviously, we always need to observe, correlate, correspond, as above, so below. That's how it works. Okay, I'm going to sign off and see you guys soon. Don't forget, classes are open with me. You're welcome to join 1 or 2 or 10 or whatever. Just email me. I can give you details, readings as well if you're interested in a reading. What else? I think that's about it. Yeah, leave your comments and questions below. I'm always curious and interested in hearing from you and hearing your responses. And I guess the ultimate takeaway with this full moon is let's be considerate about what we are saying, what we are communicating. And yes, stand in our truth, Sagittarius. But understand there are differences, Venus in Libra. And also, I forgot to mention with Cassandra being in Sagittarius as well. She's the goddess of prophecy, right? And she's in Sagittarius. So let's see what prophecies she brings through. Sagittarius ultimately connecting to truth, having a goddess of prophecy passing through, perhaps there will be some truthful prophecies that shine during this full moon. I think that the very tricky component, though, is the Mercury square Neptune, where it can leave people feeling a bit confused or a bit puzzled as to what they believed, what they thought, and what they think now, and what should they think. So let's see what comes up. Okay, see you guys soon. Much love and Venus star blessings and happy full moon.